The Israeli, U.S., and Iran war is not over. The world is holding its breath. What began as a sudden and devastating strike has spiraled into one of the most dangerous standoffs in modern history. The United States, Israel, and Iran are locked in a high-stakes clash where every move could ignite something far bigger. Warships crowd vital waterways like the Strait of Hormuz. Missiles have already flown, and global powers are watching nervously from the sidelines. But here's the twist. This isn't full-scale war, not yet. It's something more unpredictable. A fragile pause, a silent buildup, a moment where diplomacy and destruction hang in the balance. One wrong decision could tip everything over the edge. So what's really happening behind the headlines? Who's gaining ground? Who's losing control? And how close are we to the brink? Let's break it all down. Welcome to African Stories by Frank Asada. Where are you watching from? Before we dive into the Israeli, U.S., and Iran war update, we encourage you to rate the video and tell us in the comments below where you are watching from. Like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video coming up. How we got here. Quick context. The current conflict traces back to a dramatic escalation on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated large-scale strikes targeting Iran's military and political infrastructure. These attacks reportedly eliminated key members of Iran's leadership, including the supreme leader, marking an unprecedented move that significantly altered the balance of power in the region. The strikes were justified by the U.S. and Israel as necessary to counter long-standing threats, but they also triggered immediate and severe consequences. In response, Iran launched widespread retaliation, using missiles and drones across multiple fronts. These attacks target Israeli cities as well as U.S. military bases and assets throughout the Middle East, signaling that Iran was willing to escalate beyond symbolic retaliation. The use of drones and precision missiles demonstrated Iran's evolving military capabilities and its intent to impose costs on both nations while rallying regional allies and proxy forces. As a result, the conflict rapidly expanded into a broader regional war. Iran-backed groups joined the fighting. New fronts emerged in neighboring countries, and global attention intensified as fears of prolonged and large-scale war grew. This escalation continued until mounting international pressure and battlefield risks led to the fragile ceasefire currently in place, which is paused, but not resolved, the conflict. 1. A fragile ceasefire, not a real peace. A fragile ceasefire has been in place since around April 8th, following several weeks of intense fighting between Iran, Israel, and U.S.-aligned forces. While the agreement has reduced large-scale attacks, it has not brought true stability to the region. Reports from multiple sides indicate ongoing violations, including limited strikes, troop movements, and clashes involving proxy groups. In particular, tensions remain high along the Israel-Lebanon border, where Hezbollah continues to engage in intermittent skirmishes with Israeli forces. Both sides accuse each other of breaching the ceasefire terms, which further undermines trust and makes long-term peace unlikely in the near future. Military forces remain on high alert, and the situation could escalate quickly if a major incident occurs. Diplomatic efforts are ongoing, but progress is slow and uncertain. Bottom line, the war is not truly over. It is temporarily paused, with underlying tensions still unresolved. 2. Fighting has shifted to pressure tactics. Fighting has shifted away from large-scale airstrikes and ground offensives into more indirect pressure tactics designed to weaken the opponent without triggering full escalation. The United States has increased its naval presence near Iran, deploying warships and enforcing a loose blockade that restricts Iranian movement and signals readiness for rapid military action. This show of force is meant to deter further aggression while maintaining strategic control of key waterways. Meanwhile, Iran has responded asymmetrically by disrupting commercial shipping, including seizing or harassing vessels in nearby waters. These actions create uncertainty and raise the risk for global trade without requiring direct confrontation. A major flashpoint is the Strait of Hormuz, a narrow but critical passage for global energy supplies, which have become unstable and partially obstructed due to these tensions. This situation has serious global consequences, as roughly a quarter of the world's oil flows through this route. As a result, oil prices have risen, shipping costs have increased, and broader international trade has been disrupted, affecting economies worldwide. 3. Diplomacy is trying but uncertain. Diplomacy is actively underway, but remains fragile and uncertain due to deep mistrust and conflicting demands. Iran has signaled that it may return to negotiations through intermediaries such as Pakistan and Qatar, which are working to bring both sides back to the table and prevent a renewed escalation. Recent efforts include planned or ongoing talks in Islamabad, though participation and commitment levels have fluctuated, with both sides sometimes downgrading their negotiating teams or hesitating to fully engage. At the same time, the United States maintains that there is still a limited window for reaching a deal, but officials have warned that time is running out as military pressure and economic sanctions continue to intensify. This urgency is reinforced by ongoing actions like naval blockades and contingency military planning, which signal that diplomacy is being pursued alongside preparations for a possible renewed conflict. Despite these talks, both sides remain highly skeptical of each other's intentions, with Iran rejecting negotiations conducted under pressure and the U.S. insisting on major concessions. Translation: communications resumed, but trust is minimal, making any lasting agreement difficult to achieve. While enjoying the analyses, we encourage you to share and subscribe so that you never miss any of our new videos coming up. 4. Regional conflict is still active. Regional conflict is still active despite the broader ceasefire, showing that the war is not fully stopped but instead shifted into overlapping smaller conflicts. Hezbollah and Israel continue to clash along the Lebanon border, with ongoing airstrikes, drone attacks, and limited ground operations. Reports indicate that both sides are accusing each other of violating ceasefire terms, and violence has persisted even during officially agreed pauses. In fact, recent fighting has caused thousands of casualties and widespread destruction in southern Lebanon, highlighting how intense the conflict remains despite diplomatic efforts. At the same time, Iran-backed groups beyond Hezbollah remain active across the region, including militias and proxy forces aligned with Iran. These groups operate in multiple countries and continue to apply pressure on Israel and U.S. interests, making the conflict broader than a single battlefield. Iran's influence over these groups also complicates negotiations, as any escalation involving them can quickly draw Iran back into direct confrontation. Because of these overlapping conflicts, the situation could widen again very quickly. A single large strike, miscalculation, or escalation involving proxies could trigger renewed full-scale war between Israel, Iran, and possibly the United States. The region remains highly unstable, with military forces still deployed and ready to act at short notice. Big picture. The current situation sits in an uneasy and dangerous middle ground that is difficult to clearly define. It is not a full-scale war at the moment because large coordinated offensives, sustained bombing campaigns, and direct large troop engagements between major powers have mostly paused under the ceasefire. However, this does not mean stability has returned. It is also not real peace, since fighting continues in smaller forms. Tensions remain extremely high, and none of the core political or military disputes have been resolved. Both sides are still heavily armed, alert, and prepared to act. Most importantly, there is a high risk of escalation, meaning the situation could rapidly shift back into full war. A single major attack, miscalculation, or breakdown in talks could trigger widespread conflict again, making this one of the most volatile geopolitical moments in recent years. The biggest risks ahead center on how quickly the current fragile stability could collapse. A breakdown of the ceasefire would likely lead to an immediate resumption of large-scale fighting, including airstrikes, missile attacks, and potential direct clashes between major forces. Since both sides remain armed and on high alert, escalation could happen rapidly with little warning. Another major risk is a crisis in the Strait of Hormuz, a critical global oil route. Any prolonged disruption there could trigger a global economic shock by sharply increasing oil prices, disrupting supply chains, and affecting energy-dependent economies worldwide. Additionally, there's a strong risk of regional escalation, particularly involving Lebanon and Gulf states. Ongoing tensions between Israel and Hezbollah, along with the involvement of Iran-backed groups, could expand the conflict geographically, drawing in more countries and making containment far more difficult. The simple takeaway is that while the war is no longer at the intense level seen in March, it has not truly ended and remains highly unstable. First, The conflict is not actively raging in the same way it was during its peak, when large-scale airstrikes, missile barges, and direct engagements between major forces were happening frequently. Those high-intensity operations have slowed under current ceasefire, reducing immediate destruction and casualties. However, this reduction in visible fighting should not be mistaken for a resolution. The situation remains far from resolved because the core issues, security concerns, political demands, and regional influence, have not been addressed or agreed upon by the involved parties. Both sides continue to prepare for potential renewed conflict, maintaining military readiness and strategic positioning. Finally, the region is essentially locked in a tense standoff characterized by ongoing proxy conflict. Iran-backed groups, along with other regional actors, continue to engage in smaller-scale clashes, applying pressure without triggering full-scale war. This creates a persistent state of instability, where indirect fighting continues and any misstep could quickly escalate into a broader confrontation. The current conflict does not have a clear winner, but there are noticeable short-term advantages and disadvantages shaping the outcome. The United States and Israel hold a military edge, having demonstrated superior technology, intelligence, and the ability to strike key targets early in the conflict. U.S. naval dominance, particularly around the Strait of Hormuz, has helped maintain strategic pressure on Iran and protect critical shipping lanes. However, this advantage comes with significant costs, including rising military spending and the risk of deeper involvement if the conflict escalates. Iran, on the other hand, has been weakened by early strikes and ongoing economic pressure, but it is far from defeated. It continues to exert influence through proxy groups and asymmetric tactics, allowing to challenge stronger opponents without direct large-scale confrontation. Meanwhile, countries across the region, especially Lebanon and parts of the Gulf, are experiencing the most immediate damage, instability, and humanitarian strain. For the global economy, the stakes are high. Disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz, through which roughly a quarter of the world's oil passes, have pushed energy prices upward. This increases transportation and production costs worldwide, contributing to inflation. Trade routes have become riskier, raising shipping costs and slowing supply chains. For the United States, this translates into higher gas prices, economic uncertainty, and increased defense spending, all of which could have lasting domestic and global financial impacts. Words of wisdom. Even in moments of tension and uncertainty like this, history reminds us that conflict is rarely permanent. Periods of instability often give way, sometimes slowly, sometimes unexpectedly, to dialogue, compromise, and rebuilding. While the current situation feels fragile and unpredictable, it also reflects how interconnected the world has become. The stakes are high not just for one region, but for everyone. That interconnectedness can be a source of hope, because it creates shared incentives to avoid prolonged conflict and pursue stability. Wisdom in times like these comes from recognizing complexity without losing sight of humanity. Behind every headline are millions of people who want safety, dignity, and a chance to live normal lives. Leaders may disagree, but populations everywhere share far more in common than what divides them. The future is not fixed. With sustained diplomacy, restraint, and global cooperation, even the most tense standoffs can shift toward peace. Thank you for watching. Please leave comments. We will really love to hear from you. What is your takeaway? Let us know what you like or hate about the story. We take all comments very seriously. Like, share, and subscribe so that you'll be the first to be notified of our next video. Coming up,